Hey guys, what's crackin'? Godsman here, coming at you with a tier list video for the upcoming Bushiroad Spring Fest 2022. Now, as many of you know, we recently got a ban list, and it was a pretty big one for V Premium, where a lot of the top dogs end up getting hit. So you've got Luard, Melody, Prism, Gabriel, Duke. They're all got a pretty sizable hit on them, and so the format presumably is a bit more wide open. People are asking themselves, are the top dogs still the top dogs? Is the meta totally different now? What's the new best decks in that case? A lot of questions, and the answers are going to be coming presumably at Spring Fest over the next few months. So, in preparation for that, I decided to make a tier list video, which will serve as an informative guide as to what decks are more likely to top or more likely to be represented at the event. There are decks that may actually be at the event in full force but not do very well, depending on a few different factors such as deck strength, but also the awareness of others to play around that deck. Some decks tend to be very matchup specific, so there's a lot of factors there, right? But still, this is meant to be a guide as to what to keep your eye on. So one big thing to note about this particular tier list is I'm doing it via clans rather than particular decks. You might be like, Godsman, you fool, why are you doing that? Isn't it obvious that some clans have like an outlier deck or two and everything else in the clan sort of sucks? And I get that, but contrary to common logic, which actually might be more common sense when you think about it and say it out loud, a clan's many different archetypes are more relative now in V than they have been in the past. With the ban list now, we've seen a lot of the outlier decks be put in check, and now the clans tend to have more relative power level. Like, to give an example, take a look at Angel Feather, right? Angel Feather has Gabriel, which got knocked down considerably. So now if you were to ask yourself, is present Gabriel better than Celestial? It's kind of debatable. Is it better than Malkuth, right? These decks are actually all like, oh, I don't know, right? They have their potential within the tournament that's coming up. Now, is it very much potential? Who knows? But the potential is relative. Same with decks like Pale Moon, same with decks like Nova Grappler. The disparity is a lot lower. So to make this deck more succinct and more easy to digest, we're going to be taking a look at clans as a whole. Now, that said, fret not, because if a clan does have still a big outlier deck or two that's way above everyone else, then they're going to be going high on the tier list anyway. It just goes to show that despite the outliers, a clan can be bad otherwise, but those outliers will be considered and will be hauling. But there's not going to be many of them, I'll inform you. And it's more sensible that way too, because when you're looking at it from clan by clan basis, we start to realize that a lot of clans use certain staples, and so a lot of what makes any given sub-clan powerful tends to not vary very much. Like, they may have different strategies, but they still use some key pieces. Granblue being a big offender, right? You've got your Skull Dragon, your Columbard, your Greed Shade, yada yada, right? Whether you're playing Ghosty, Pinot Noir, and of course Night Rose, they're going to be all using those key pieces, right? So that's another reason why I'm going to go with the clan by clan system. So, we good? Let's begin. Now, starting out with Angel Feather, I've already alluded to it, but Angel Feather does have some decent potential, so I'm going to put it in the good considerable contender tier. Gabriel was a pretty big menace. Oh god, Hamuel, right? Hamuel is banned, and with the banning of Hamuel, Gabriel has essentially lost its main win condition. Now, fret not, because I have heard a lot about other win conditions that have been cooked up. Things like the Aeroid that has a guard restrict, things like Feather Palace. Gabriel has been trying to cook up other ways. The problem is that they are not nearly Hamuel, because the setup behind them is not the same. Hamuel was so fast and so strong, and the alternatives are neither of those things. So while Gabriel still has a potential win con in the source, that win con is not nearly as good. And then when you look at things like Celestial and things like Malkuth Malik, these decks have the potential to pop off, but when they have a bad game, it hurts hard. So their ability to actually make it into the top tables is there, but the player might have to have a lot of good games in order to get that way. So that's why I'm going to put it more in the middle. This is a good example of a clan that has a lot of decks that are very relative in power level, and that power level is not too high or too low. It's more in the middle. Going on to Aqua Force. So Aqua Force is a little bit tricky depending on where you look at it, but I think if we're looking at it in terms of what to look out for and also representation, then you definitely got to look out for Aqua Force. So this is a little bit weird, right? I think if you're talking about in terms of pure power level, it's more down here in the very strong tier, but I am going to put it in Definite Contender, and it's going to go lower on Definite Contender as we get more entries in. But you've got Thavis, and as will be kind of a trend, a lot of G-Boot decks tend to be the better representatives of a clan's strength these days, especially with the hit now. So the G-Boot deck here for Aqua Force is Thavis, and Thavis just got Pursuit Assault for the English format, and that is huge. Thavis is going to be performing presumably about as well as it did in Japan now that they've got the card that they need to push forward. And on top of that, let's not forget that Maelstrom actually topped in BRO, and that was a very important top because Glory Maelstrom is a win condition as stronger as ever due to the fact that we're not running 20k shields anymore. We're running Heal Guardians by and large. If you're running 20k, then cool, you got a good matchup with it. But otherwise, Glory is going to ruin your day because it consistently hits for 29 numbers. So 29 on a base Vanguard demands 20 for each guard. If you can't fulfill it, you're going to get hit. Again, the consistency of these decks are a little bit debatable. Thavis is very consistent, but its ability to close out games may not be quite as strong as Maelstrom, and Maelstrom's vice versa, but I'm going to put it on a Definite Contender here. Bermuda. So I think Bermuda is going to go into very strong. So with both Melody and Prism getting their hits, a lot of people are wondering, hey, so is Bermuda still on the map or is it not? And I think it's still definitely on the map. Particularly Prism is. I think Melody, that was kind of for it. Having to get their main consistency piece to 1 definitely hurts a deck that already suffered consistency-wise. So Melody's out. But we still have Prism, and I think Prism has options you can fall back on. It's not as tanky as it used to be, and it also doesn't have like that super searcher to go for it. So because of that, we're dealing more with a base fair Prism, and a base fair Prism garners up a lot of hand advantage, but that hand advantage is not infallible anymore. So I think it's more susceptible, but at the same time, it can overwhelm a deck all the same. So it's going to be a very strong contender here. Moving on to Dark Irregular. Dark Irregular does a G-Boot deck in the form of Shahodot, and Shahodot definitely can do things, but I've noticed that Shahodot's ability to perform is a little bit inconsistent sometimes, and other than Shahodot, we're getting a little bit lower. I think the next best Dark Irregular deck you're going to find in V right now, this might be capping it a little bit. I'm not sure if this is necessarily accurate, but I would say that your next best Dark Regular deck is going to be Amon. So Amon has some cool tricks, but it's very much unproven on the battlefield. One of my friends, as a matter of fact, he's going to be a part of my team for Spring Fest. He's going to bring Amon, and Amon in testing has pulled off some pretty crazy shenanigans, right? Mainly because of Gasteel, and Gasteel is huge for this deck, and also Gasteel is a win condition for Shaharo too, but its ability to last until that point and actually last while being able to fulfill the 20 soul, presumably, it's not going to happen all the time. So for that reason, I think this is going to be in the good considerable contender. I'm going to put it above Angel Feather because Shaharo with Number Terror can burst out, but I just think that compared to something like Bermuda and Aqua Force, this isn't as likely to happen. So, Dimension Police. They got Original Saber 0. It's not going to help. Daikaiser is a cool card. But other than that, in terms of Dimension Police decks that will be doing something, there's not a lot to really say here. I'm going to put them in the unlikely contender. I don't think they're even really rogue because, let's be real. With Dimension Police, sure, it can be super dangerous and on paper it can kill you, but it struggles so hard because, as we're going to find out, this meta is going to be a meta that's somewhat aggressive and somewhat control based. There's somewhat of a mix of it. My friend Assault Rider, which as he will say all the time, points out we are going into a control meta. So Vanguard Boomerang aside, I don't necessarily believe that. I think that aggression is still a really big part of how V Premium is played, but now the aggression that we're playing with is going to be a little bit more tapered down. It's going to be a thing where your aggression decks tend to have less consistency with them. Things like the Cross and Astral Poet. Sure, they've got some consistency pieces, but at the same time, they can also get shut down by a heal guard, so that hurts them a lot, right? So in order for those decks to thrive, they kind of have to do what Gabriel did, which was adopt more state power elements, things like PGs, things like perhaps even a defensive unit they have access to it. So for whatever reason, they probably want to 2-tap an opponent rather than 1-tap them now. And so because of that, we're going into more of a turn 4 game than was a turn 3 game, and that's why decks that are more consistent are going to be king here. This deck doesn't fall in that category, and its ability to kill, while it's there, thanks to Tachikaze and whatnot, its pressure is just not what it could be. Speaking of pressure, I think very strong solid contender, Gear Chronicle. So Gear Chronicle, if for nothing else, we're going to be seeing it at this event. I will be astonished if we don't see at least some dudes in the event like play Chronojet. And here's the thing about Gears, right? Everything else about Gears is not really going to be doing anything. Steve Ains ain't doing anything. Lost Legend isn't doing anything. No Mystery Flare shenanigans. No Chrono Tiger. I would almost just be certain. I would be so surprised if Chrono Tiger did anything. It's purely Chronojet. But as I said at the start of this video, one deck that is well above the rest is enough to make the clan be in this spot, because we still have to worry about the clan. Whatever version of Chronojet you come across, that Chronojet might be playing different stuff, right? Different grade 4s and whatnot. So why do we worry about Chronojet? Mainly because of Chronojet itself. It gets huge numbers and a Sentinel Restrict. So a huge number with Sentinel Restrict is kind of like what Hamiel did, but Chronojet is more fair because in order to get the most out of it, the opponent has to be a grade 3 or greater, thanks to next stage's stipulations. So they can't necessarily OTK before they're grade 3. And if you want the ensured crit like Hamiel did, you're going to go for Force 2. But if you go for Force 2, then you can't be stacking Force 1s on the Vanguard Circle, which makes it impossibly big. So you're facing a catch-22 with that. You have to make that balance. So Chronojet suffers that. And of course, Gear Chronicle in of itself has to deal with an entire different grade, which is grade 4. So the consistency of it is a bit down. So I'm going to put it more on the lower end here. But just the sheer power output of it is just enough that even when literally with a Chronojet player, if they set things up right, all they need to do is just literally go into next stage. Have no other cards out there, just go into next stage and hit. It's very simple, very direct game plan, so that's why it's manageable and fearsome. But again, it's not that consistent, so it's going to go more on the lower end here. Genesis, going to top decks. So mainly because of Astral Poet. Astral Poet, we gotta watch out for it. There's no doubt about it. No here or there about it. We gotta watch out for Astral Poet now. Sure, okay, heal guards are kind of rough, but when the main thing that you're gonna be heal guarding is a Valkyrian, which can restand, that's actually where Valkyrian kind of scales above something like Hamiel, right? Because Hamiel only got 1 swing for all its power, but Valk gets 2. So Valk is more of a reliable game plan against a heal guard. And because of that, it's as dangerous as ever. It got no hits. Astral Poets are just as strong as they were the previous formats. So because a lot of the other decks that could have kept them in check are now sort of gone, Astral Poet has to naturally rise to the top. I don't see a lot of other Genesis decks doing well by comparison. This is a lot like Gear Chronicle in that you get an outlier deck here, but you gotta watch out for the clan, right? Because some things that you might see from Astral Poet mainly are just an absurd OTK, but I don't see you're going to see much of the Genesis stuff outside of that. But just know that there could be potential Himiko players. They can OTK before you get to grade 3, but that deck by comparison just isn't nearly as fearsome. So watch out for those decks, but mainly watch out for Astral Poet. Valk is going to be very, very big, and your main way of overcoming Astral Poet, I would say, is either A, go first. That's really helpful against that deck, genuinely. Or B, try to stock up on defensive cards and then push them into a corner. Generally speaking, decks like this, which are big on OTKs, tend to be susceptible to early rush as well. So if you have the ability to early rush, do it. Hit them hard, make them use up their resources. Field control them if you can, get rid of their hand as fast as you can. You'll find that they can't defend as easily because all the extra grade 3s, and then rush them down. So rush them down, survive their one clap back chance, and then hit them hard. And that's how you do it. But again, this is better. It's much easier said than done. So that's why it's going to be in top deck. You're going to see it. Performance or not, it may not perform consistently. You're going to see it, and you need to know what to do against it. Gold Paladin. This one is tough because we lost Percival. So where do we go from here? Like, seriously, where do we go from here? And I think where we go from here is to say a solid contender. So it's going to go down here, though. Here's the thing about Gold Paladin. Percival was the clan in a sense, but not the entire clan. Percival gave that extra, like, Saki 1-of option, and because it's giving it in that form rather than just as consistent, like, okay, excel, even one extra excel with Percival is pretty key. It's pretty good. So you can get high rolled into it. And here's the thing, right? This is one of the only examples I can see where this ban list has both hit a clan and benefited a clan. Because now that Gurgit and Percival are friends again, we can definitely see Gurgit back on. And I think Gurgit is pretty insane. Is it better than Duke, though? That's a really good question. I think Gurgit's ceiling is far higher than Duke, but Duke is the more consistent option. Duke did really dig the Percival, though, to get those extra attacks, but it didn't need it as much as I think it was letting on. It's such a good consistency option, though, and I think Duke sort of tapers off without it, because the way we look at Duke is we look at Duke as a big multi-attack deck that relies on its massive hand advantage and field advantage to really just go at the opponent. So Percival, unfortunately, was a big source of that, because with Percival comes Aglavale, and Aglavale sucks your pieces into soul. It's able to hit for big, good numbers on Excel markers, and honestly, without Percival and those extra Excel markers, which still has it a 1-of, Percival kind of makes Duke feel a little bit lost. So it definitely got a hit. I'm still going to put it on very strong, though, because Gold Paladin, funnily enough, for having Percival at a 1-of, it has a good ability to hit Percivals because, of course, the main gimmick is digging things from the deck. So I would say look out for Duke, but also look out for Gurgit. And also Ezel, actually. Ezel is another one that's pretty big as an OTK deck right now. But not, like, really the OTK deck that you would expect, because it doesn't, like, kill you early. It just sort of butters you up, and then it rushes really hard with Ezel Scissors. And Ezel Scissors is really devastating. Yeah, I'm just going to say it. Ezel Scissors will take games a lot. So it's super inconsistent, though. It's super sacky. Ezel is sacky as it comes. So the likelihood of it is not as big as I think some people might fear. But because all these are potential options that can hurt, like, pretty bad, and it can actually top, I would say they belong here collectively. So, Granblue, right here, very top. Night Rose, so good. It's another G deck, and this one was already, like, having fairly, like, somewhat consistent tops alongside Astral Poet. There's some somewhat consistent tops with freaking Night Rose, and why is that? Well, because Skull Dragon is a card, right? And just Granblue as a clan has so many good things. It has Skull Dragon, Ghost Ship, Sea Skeleton, Beatrice, Columbard, Greed Shade. Need I go on? It's stupid, man. They've got so many staples. Like, their staples are so good that decks like Ghosty and Pinot Noir even, like, might pop up. Pinot Noir is a little bit more of, like, I mean, hey, I don't know, I'm probably not expecting it, but Ghosty, yeah, you can. Ghosty is a good tanky deck for it. So this deck is kind of king, and this clan, I think, is going to be the one we need to look out for the most. If you're going to need to get one matchup down, dear viewer, I would say get the Night Rose matchup down, and just the Granblue matchup in general. Understand how Granblue works. Like, understand that, yeah, okay, cool, they're a drop zone deck, but understand how your matchup interacts with that drop zone deck, because at first glance it was saying, oh, well, their pieces are dumped in there, they're always going to have that stuff in their protect decks, they're kind of tanky. It feels that way, but the cracks can show, so you need to understand on a intrinsic level, what do they have, what are they going to do in order to get what they need, and if they can't get what they need, how does that hurt them? How you capitalize on that, right? It's a tricky game, but I think Night Rose is super consistent in what it does, and I don't think you can really counter it with any basic strategy. You need to counter it based on how your deck in particular plays the game. So we need to study this deck, because with the other decks going down, this one went up. Great Nature, not a really likely contender. I don't see anything really doing anything about it. Big Belly, nah. Isabel, nah. New Polaris and Locks don't really do much. Like, sure, okay, they're cool, but I don't think they're gonna like do much compared to the other decks here. Kagero, Kagero's gonna go into solid contender here. So yeah, here's the thing. Kagero got some pretty cool cards. I'm not going to put this up necessarily for Lockkeeper, although I think Lockkeeper might pop up, funnily enough. Although, me less than Assault Rider. Assault Rider actually thought more about that. He was very adamant that, oh, someone's going to bring Lockkeeper for the control meta, right? Again, Vanguard Boomer. So, control meta aside, I think we all know what deck really is putting it up here, which is the Cross. The Cross, yeah, sure, heal guards hurt it, but let's also be real here, fellas. The Cross also has access to heal guards and crit sentinels and other stuff, right? If the Cross felt like it could be tanky and then just go again next turn, much like how Astral Poet can just go again next turn and try again, right? It has the ability to say there is a next turn. So with that in mind, it's such a vicious OTK deck. The Cross was a lot like Gabriel, right? It was more of a debate on what was your flavor. The Cross was one flavor of OTK, whereas Hamill's a different flavor of OTK, and Hamill ultimately proved to be the more troublesome one. But this is still here. This carries on the spirit of what that deck tried to do, which was kill you before you effing make it a grade 3. So we gotta be aware of it. And also, Dawnland's Reverse is pretty good. I don't think Dawnland's Reverse is necessarily going to make any top spots, but, you know, watch out for that too. Link Joker, it's going up here. I'm going to put it behind Aqua Force though. So yeah, Messiah did pretty freaking well at BRO. Good option for just like bashing people in the face with the Volca Goats and doing it early, doing it quickly. But on top of that, we could also see that Starvader might be something there, but it's really matchup dependent. If it was based on Starvader, I would put it down more into Rogue, but because Messiah is a thing, I'm going to put it in the top deck as well, because whether it's Starvader or Messiah, you have to look at it, and you have to understand how that deck functions and how to counter it, right? You need to understand what your numbers are with Volca Goat, and you need to understand, okay, if I need to take some attacks, which attacks do you take for the Messiah player? What is their real strategy, right? Which, you know, Messiah's a beatdown deck, but it's a beatdown deck that does have some amount of resistance to field control, thanks to Ultra Ego and whatnot. But then all of a sudden they can get huge advantage with Harmonix Messiah, right? So they have some tricks up their sleeve, which can be, if you don't know what they do, it's going to catch you by surprise, and that's a pretty bad day. So yeah, they're going to go on the bottom here. So, as a clan, I think Megacolony is Rogue. And it's going to be our first Rogue for a pretty good reason, which is Giraffa. I think Giraffa, Master Beetle, and just like the Paralyzed gimmick in general, it's not that strong. It really isn't. But there are, every once in a while, a genius Megacolony player who will do something about that. And if you don't know what it does, it's going to hurt. Like, that's the thing. You gotta, if you know what it does, you're good, but you should know it. And that's really it, right? Sure, okay, Gridora is the G deck for this deck, and as far as G decks go, it's good. I mean, how even Machining got their promo now with, I think it's Saturn or Atlas or something was the name of it. But collectively, they're not going to be doing too much. I don't expect them, like, in honesty, they should probably be under here, but I think because of Giraffa, which actually is pretty good. And also Brilliant Blister, right? Brilliant Blister is something you're going to see in a lot of Megacolony decks now, I think, because it's such a good counter to things like Volcagoat and whatnot. And also Skull Dragons, right? It's a counter to Volcagoat, it's a counter to Skull Dragons, it's a counter to some of what these decks up here. Like, for instance, it's also a counter to the Valkyrian, potentially. So, because it actually has good counter with the presumable top decks because of that card, yeah, I'm going to put it up here. Now, moving up, Murakumo. I'm going to put it in Rogue. The only reason is Yasue. Yasue actually got a top in BRO. And I don't think the new cards do anything for it. Like, those decks are cool. Like, they are cool, but let's look down what they have. Shiryuki, nah. Weasels, nah. Stealth Fiends, nah. And Hyaki Vogue, nah. Like, all three of those were definite upgrades to their decks, but their decks were just, like, bad. So they just went from bad to more or less playable. And so Yasue is kind of the standout here. And it can do some shenanigans. And I think Shiryuki as a defensive unit rather than a main deck strategy is a good thing when we're talking about front row restands. Like, Shahoro has front row restands. You're able to see front row restands with Messiah does that. You get front row with things like Granblue, so Shiryuki's good against that. So again, like, it's kind of matchup dependent, but it has some good things going for it. Narukami. So Narukami, I'm gonna put in good. So it's got Vanquisher going for it. Vanquisher is a big one. I think Vanquisher is going to be the main thing to look out for. Eradicator aren't really going to do much. Neither is Dungaree or anything like that. And let's not even talk about, like, Vermilion. I love that card for what it does, but what it does is not that great. So we're really looking at Vanquisher. And for Vanquisher and just the Narukami strategy as a whole, Narukami as a clan, we gotta look out for its combination of aggression and control. So if you're a deck that's somewhat field sensitive, then you have to negotiate what you give and what you keep from the Narukami player. That's just how that matchup's gonna go. We have to look out for it. So because that's what we have to look out for, be careful with Vanquisher. Its multi-attack is real. It's got an extra van attack. It can get a lot of, like, calls from the whole hand bind to field mechanic. And again, it'll snipe things from your hand and field and whatnot. So that can be devastating, right? The only reason why it's not, like, in the top decks here is I think what people say about Vanquisher, like, oh, Vanquisher's going to come back. It's going to hit hard, right? Like, there was that huff and puff with VRO as well. It didn't do anything, and I don't think like things have changed enough that it's going to be like super big up here. But I will put it at the top of good because again, it is a G-boot deck, and as a G-boot deck go, it has its ability to hurt. Nectar. It's the top of underpowered because Musketeers have Cecilia Reverse, which is a multi-attack, and Vera is a good Vanguard, but there's no consistency behind it, and it doesn't push hard enough. It simply does not have the offensive pressure to stay in the game at this point. Its offensive pressure does not justify the fact that the deck also suffers with having, like, consistent advantage, right? So if it's just a pure contest of strength, Musketeers are going to lose most of the time. And when you look at things like Asha is really, like, gimmicky. I think they get a boost with Katrina, but that promo's not out yet, so, you know, F in the chat for that, right? And aside from that, Stampini isn't really doing much either, right? Nectar as a clan overall just has a hard time catching up with the other decks here. It really does. And something similar can be said for Nova Grappler, but I think I'm going to put Nova Grappler over here. Mainly because I think Nova Grappler, like, actually, no. Novas are going to go here. Novas are kind of the same thing, right? Like, Risers on a blue moon can OTK you, sure, okay. But really, Nova Grappler as a collective clan is just a multi-attack that doesn't have anything really standing out for it. Blouse are the consistent version of the Nova Grappler thing. Beast Deity have Ethics Buster Reverse now, which is a multi-standing Vanguard, and that's cool pressure, right? But I don't see it doing anything, right? In testing, it's particularly strong, but not that strong. Is it better than Musketeers, though? Is it better than Neo Nectar? They're relative. I think these two could kind of switch, but they're underpowered, so they're an unlikely contender, right? No, like these things back here, I'm not saying absolutely won't do anything, but it's very unlikely. Like there's no deck that really stands out that way. So moving on to Nubatama, I'm gonna put Nubatama into like a roguish tier. So the thing about Nubatama is they actually do have a couple decks that could potentially do something. Mainly, you've got Daihozan, right? Daihozan might come back now because Daihozan punishes hand advantage and calling, which that punishment can hurt a fair bit of decks. So that punishment is good. But also, let's take a look at Shiranui, right? Shiranui is another G deck, and as far as G decks goes, it's pretty consistent. Its ability to get essentially 2 Vanguard attacks, although one of them is a token, but on top of that, its element of control is pretty wild, right? Because let's just take Night Rose for example. If you bind a Skull Dragon for your Mask of Domination token, they're going to be crying, like pretty badly. Like that's pretty bad stuff, unfortunately. Likewise, you could abuse things like with Aqua Force, get some of their multi-attackers. You're able to abuse things like some of the Messiah units. I think Volcagoat even can be like bound, and then like to get taken. So because of that, the Mask of Domination token is very quirky. That compared with just the bigger attacks, and let's keep in mind, right? I think a little remembered thing about Nubatama is you've got some lovely kill options, right? You've got things that will come out the wazoo, right? Like Mizukaze, that'll kill you. Fuzen Congo, it's my favorite one, that'll kill you. The Crow will kill you. So they've got pretty wicked like kill options that it will definitely smack you hard if you're not careful about it, right? So that's why I think this can pop up now in the new meta. OTT, let's see. OTT got Witch support. I don't think the Witch support is going to do anything. The Tsukiyomi support probably isn't going to do anything, but Susanoo, as a G deck goes, like Susanoo has some strength, but yeah, I don't think it's going to do very much. But yeah, it's an unlikely contender. I don't think there's anything about like OTT that's really going to put it above anything else right now. There's no version of OTT, not even Battle Sister or whatnot, that really is going to break into rogue tier, because let's be real, right? With these rogue tiers, there's at least something that like some unit or some deck you can say, oh, but this could do something, right? You can't really say the same for these decks down here. Not really. Pale Moon? Pale Moon's going to be going here. Let's put it right here. So yeah, Pale Moon's a considerable contender, right? You have a lot of these decks that are somewhat decent. You can see them. So Silverthorn, you can see Nightmare Dolls, you can potentially also see bunnies. These are all decks that actually have some potential. These are respectable decks. The clan as a whole is in a respectable power level where it's not like nutty, like it doesn't have any nutty decks going for it, nor does it have like super nutty staples that are like super dangerous for any means. But at the same time, it's not crap, right? Even Hari can do stuff as well. So all the decks actually have this ability, like they have like some win condition in mind, and they have a good power level, right? Nightmare Dolls can kill you pretty early. The rush is pretty good. I would submit to you that Nightmare Dolls is probably the best Pale Moon deck, but of course Silverthorn is going to contest it because now they got Lukier Reverse, which has some shenanigans going with it, and of course Hari has its own win condition in a Sentinel Restrict, which is good old Starry Pop Dragon, right? And there was one, oh yeah, Telopse, right? Telopse is pretty unpredictable because of its ability to make other like cards Vanguards and whatnot. So that card actually makes good consistency pieces. It does make good use of power-ups and getting extra drive checks, and has good pressure with it. So yeah, overall, Pale Moon's in a good spot. It's probably not going to jump too high here, but Pale Moon's in a good spot. Royal Paladin. So Royal Paladin, I think, is going to go like right here. So here's the thing about Royal Paladin. Yeah, I think as a whole though, I think we're gonna see it more. So here's the thing. Royals is one of those clans where they seem to always be there. They're always there with some sort of variant, right? And that variant is going to be doing stuff. They don't necessarily, they're not like definitely going to top, but they're a solid enough contender. And like as a clan, it's sort of like the opposite of these guys down here, where there's not a single one that you can say it might do something. Royals is up here because almost all their decks you can say can do something, right? Alt Mile can do something. Jewel Knights, the new Jewel Knights could do something. They're pretty explosive. MLB definitely can do like stuff, right? With the Jewel Knight engine. You've also got the Jewel Knight engine, which helps Sanctuary Guard. That's another big version of Royals. Even freaking Seeker's Thingsaver Dragon actually can do something. Although I think Seeker's is more on the lower end of the spectrum, right? Seeker's did attempt at BRO, and I think it did okay, but it didn't perform that well, right? So this is more for a lot of the other versions of Royals. You're definitely going to see Royals, right? Again, this is again like to be something where you look at it and say, okay, these are the decks that are pretty powerful and got to look out for. And this is where Royals has got to stick for that. In particular, you got to look out for, well, really you got to look out for all of them, but for different reasons, right? As a Paladin guy, you can just explain straight up that Alt Mile is going to hurt because it's sort of like Luard for grade 2s. It just doesn't have some super big multi-attack going on with it, but it's also more tanky than Luard, theoretically speaking, right? It's more tanky. Then you've got Sanctuary Guard, really big Re-Standard, which buffs up the front row. It's kind of like Raging Fall, but to be quite frank, unlike Raging Fall, it's more like field sensitive, but the power output is stronger than Raging Fall. And then you've got Jewel Knights, which are super explosive, but they're kind of in a weird place. They don't have enough Jewel Knights to be that consistent, so maybe not worry about them so much. MLB is probably the one to worry about the most. I see MLB most often. If you're playing an Excel deck, especially, you're going to cry to the 18. The 18 base power is super devastating. Of course, it gets the extra crit, the extra drive. It gets multi-attack with the Jewel Knights. It's got a lot of good stuff. So I think MLB and Sanctuary Guard are your like biggest ones to look out for. Shadow Paladin, this is another one where people are really wondering, did Luard get hit really hard? The answer is yes. Are we still going to see a lot of Shadow Paladins? The answer is also yes. But I'm going to put it more down here. Here's the thing. I think people are still going to try their metal with Luard. It's not going to work very well. But they are going to try their metal with Revengers. And Revengers, okay, look, I'm the Revenger main, so I know a lot of people might be thinking, oh, gods, man, he's going to be gassing it up, but really, when we're looking at how the deck performs, it is a pretty solid deck. It does have all the pieces it needs to compete at a pretty solid level. It's one of those things where if you look at it at the Revengers level, then you've got some build variety with it. You could be running the Phantom Blaster Superior Ride with it. You could be running a Raging Fall version. You could be running a Mordred Phantom version, which is, you know, what I'm going to be doing, right? And I think that the potential to put out some power is there. The only thing that hurts Revengers' deck, and I also just kind of like Shadow Paladins, right? I think right now is in a weird place because with the loss of Charon, there's a countercharging like thing that's to be negotiated. Luard has big countercharging problems, and other versions of Shadow Paladin which wanted countercharging looked to Charon to be their main form of countercharging. So that is a hit to the clan as a whole, but Revengers feel the most unaffected by that because we didn't even really run Charon for the most part. We could run things like Bronwyn and things like Leofall, but far and away, you're just looking to hit big with a bunch of Revengers on the field, Raging Form attack multiple times, and yeah, because of Raging Form, it's got such a good multi-attack potential. Like, if you get triple RFD with Limit Break, that's 7 attacks, man. And if you've already got a Force Marker or 2 there, maybe because you roll into, like, Raging Reverse or Mordred, then guess what? All of your numbers are going to be pretty big. They've got 7 of them to deal with it. That's a level of power output that's comparable to the top decks, if not greater. But the only thing that keeps it more down here is I don't think people are going to really try to test their luck with it because while it is consistent, it burns their resources somewhat quickly unless you get a good optimal hand. So you have to negotiate how piece reliant with it is, and the less piece reliant you make it, the less offensively powerful it is, I feel. Case in point is Mordred, right? Do you run Mordred, don't you? It hurts the consistency, but adds a new layer of power with all the Force Marker spam. So yeah, I think it's going to be up here. I think we're going to be seeing it, and it could perform pretty freaking well. But I wouldn't necessarily say that it's going to be the definite contenders, right? I could see the event just going without it, if I'm being real. Now, Spike Brothers, Super Rogue, Deadly's the only thing really to mention here. Rising Nova can use the Deadly stuff too. It can get some super fast and aggressive attacks, but its main crippling, it has one big flaw, which is its defensive power. It just does not stay in the game long enough, right? At least with things like Revengers and whatnot, and how even things like Kagero, right? It felt like those decks could potentially stay in the game more than this deck can, for the level of offense that they bring to the table. So yeah, I'm also going to put Tachis in the Bro Contender, but I think I'm going to put Tachis here. As a matter of fact, let's put it above Megacolony even. Mainly because Spinal Driver is pretty stupid, dude. Spinal Driver adds so much to the deck, and when you pair it up with something like Gaia, the deck is pretty freaking solid. Now, I'm not going to put it up here, much to the dismay of a couple of the folks in my group, like Xenon and Assault Rider, right? Like, they really gas up Tachis, and I think Tachis can perform really well, but Tachis are in a weird spot. They could potentially go here because Spino is such good consistent support, but at the same time I don't know if I want to go that far with it. The Military Raptors also help, so honestly, you know what, fine. Tachis are at the very bottom of good, because when you look at Tachis as a whole, they have different flavors of the same basic thing, right? Gaia uses the equip gauges for big beefy multi-attack, and I think that's the best version of Tachis. Then you've also got versions that are more Spinal Driver and True Ancient Dragon oriented. That can definitely push really big too, but there's less multi-attack with it in general, and on top of that, it also tends to be more like inconsistent. And then also you got the Raptor Ride Line. The Raptor Ride Line is actually got some good potential there. I can see the Raptor Ride Line actually adding more to it. So Tachis is an example of a deck where much like something like Granblue, a lot of your main pieces in a Tachi deck are going to be somewhat the same. It feels like if you're trying to go for the multi-attack and equip gauging and all that, right? You got your Savage Shooter, your Mega Rex, your Regiment Dragons, and then what was it, like Blue Sprint, Regiodon and whatnot. Like, you've got your basic pieces to really go ham on it, right? And those pieces don't change, and they provide like decent potential, but I personally don't see it really breaking through, which is why it's at the bottom of this good tier. And with that, that's going to be the end of the tier list video. A pretty nice tier list, if I do say so myself. I think this is a pretty accurate representation of what we're going to be seeing at the event. Even though I do have them organized, do keep in mind that this organization, like between the different clans, is a lot more negotiable than in between tiers. So leave me any comments or suggestions, criticisms about this tier list. If there's anything that I'm overlooking here, like any particular sub-clan that I didn't take into account when making these clans, please do tell me. If you did like the tier list, and heck, if you want to see more of my tier list, then also let me know down in the comment sections below. And do subscribe if you want to see more of this Vanguard content. Alright, with that, take care. God bless.